Hello and welcome to News Now. I'm your host, Taylor Inman. We're going over the biggest headlines this week for Northwest Montana. Cuts to the federal workforce have hit home. According to a source at the Flathead National Forest, who provided information as they were not authorized to speak publicly, 38 probationary employees were fired as of Monday and more were expected. A former Jewel Basin Ranger, who declined to give his name, said he was fired on Monday, even though he had good performance reviews and had been at the job for several years. He was not alone. Almost all the job cuts on the Flathead National Forest were field workers, such as trail crew workers, timber cruisers, river rangers, and wildlife and botany technicians, according to the former ranger, who added more cuts could be coming in the days ahead. The cuts, ordered under the Trump administration through the new Department of Government Efficiency, headed by Elon Musk, are designed to hem in government spending. But the source said most of those that were fired were paid for through funds raised by the Flathead National Forest fees, such as fees associated with timber sales or outfitter and guide fees paid to the forest. They were not taxpayer dollars. Another problem with the cuts is last year the Forest Service recently changed the way it hired seasonal employees. In the past, the Forest Service would hire seasonal employees annually, and then they would be terminated at the end of the season only to be rehired if they so choose the following year. This made it difficult to retain employees and made it difficult to plan ahead, so the Forest Service changed its hiring practices and created permanent seasonal positions, which helped retain employees and made for better planning. The only caveat was the employees had benefits they normally wouldn't get as seasonals, so there was an added expense. But those jobs are now considered probationary, so they got the axe, even though they may actually worked for the agency for years. Most of the positions that were cut also had the ability to perform other duties, such as firefighting. Almost all of them had red cards, according to the source, meaning they had gone through basic firefighter training. While they wouldn't normally fight fire, they could be pressed into service immediately if need be. Jack Carroll, a seasonal employee who was one of the people fired on Friday, offered his perspective in an email to the Hungry Horse News. He said, quote, "I personally only have ever been found fully successful at my job, and I have worked for 3 different federal agencies, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, National Park Service, and Forest Service. In fact, I have received performance awards during 5 out of 6 seasons I have served the federal government." End quote. He called the firings unjust. Carroll made it clear he was speaking only on his behalf, not on any agency. He noted that, like others, he was considered probationary only because of the change in hiring practices. The Jewel Basin Ranger had similar sentiments, saying his job was to educate the public on things like safe food handling in grizzly bear country, keeping a clean camp, and making sure dogs in the Jewel Basin were on leash. Montana Republican Senator Steve Daines issued the following statement on the cuts. He said, quote, "Our Forest Service and National Park employees work hard every day to manage our lands and support our Montana outdoor way of life. As chairman of the Senate Subcommittee on National Parks, I have seen firsthand the issues facing our public lands, and I'm always looking for ways to address these issues. I'll continue to work with the USDA and the DOI to make sure we have personnel in place to protect our lands and outdoor way of life." End quote. The Columbia Falls Weyerhaeuser MDF plant was rocked by an explosion and fired at about 7:50 a.m. on Wednesday. The explosion may have been caused by an electrical arc in the power distribution center, which runs both lines of the plant, according to Columbia Falls Fire Chief Carl Weeks. No one was injured in the blast, which blew walls out of the building and garage doors off their hinges. The electrical surge at the time was so great that the Flathead Electric Co-op noticed the power draw on the grid, according to Weeks. A man who was driving his children to school said he saw a fireball rise about 200 feet into the air at the time of the explosion. Weeks said plant workers also saw a fireball. He said the call came in at about 7:51 a.m. and the first firefighters were on the scene 8 minutes later. He said firefighters battled active fire inside the building until 12:51 p.m. and were still on the scene, hitting hot spots at 4 p.m. Damage, including downtime of the mill, which is designed to run continuously, is still under investigation by the company officials, according to Betsy Earls, public affairs manager with Weyerhaeuser. The alert helicopter circled the scene several times but did not land, and Three Rivers Ambulance was on standby at the initial stages of the fire. Temperatures at the time were in the low teens. Bad Rock, Evergreen, Whitefish, and Kalispell fire departments all responded with mutual aid. The plant has an extensive fire suppression system but has caught fire in the past. MDF is made from sawdust particles, which can be highly flammable. The wood fibers are glued together under immense pressure from huge presses which make fiberboard. The production lines were not damaged. The plant has 2 lines and is capable of producing 265 million square feet of 3/4-inch MDF annually. The plant has about 200 employees. A new fire management plan for Glacier National Park will incorporate prescribed burning and other forest treatments into the park's ongoing efforts to prevent wildfires. Since the fire management plan's last update in March of 2003, public sentiment toward forest fires has evolved, park visitation has exploded, and about 221,000 acres of parkland have been burned in wildfires. Despite these shifts, Glacier National Park's fire management officer Jeremy Harker said the work on the ground remains much the same. The 2025 Fire Management Plan includes many of the same strategies that wildland firefighters already use to combat burns, including fire lines and fuel breaks, backfires and burnouts, and the use of water and, in certain circumstances, chemical retardants. Under the new plan, crews will also undertake preventative measures in some areas of the park, all of which have been exposed to similar treatments before. Park officials plan to burn 400 acres of grassland and 150 acres of forest land in Big Prairie and Sullivan Meadow, mimicking management practices that indigenous people likely employed long before the park's existence. Park officials completed prescribed burns in the 80s and 90s to maintain open topography of the meadows and ponderosa pine stands, but lodgepole pines have since crept in, making the area more prone to catastrophic wildfires. Prescribed burns will target young lodgepole seedlings and take place during moist spring months when fire danger is low. An environmental assessment found the prescribed burns would negatively impact air quality, wilderness quality, soundscapes, and some wildlife in the short term, though the effects would be minimal and localized. The burns are expected to benefit vegetation, soil health, and cultural resources. Similar impacts are expected as crews thin forest stands around buildings and other structures. According to the plan, the complete fireproofing of historic structures and other resources is not possible, but, quote, the probability of losing a structure to wildfire would be reduced substantially through methods such as wrapping structures with fire-resistant materials, use of water sprinklers, and the creation of defensible space. Even with those measures in place, the Sprig Fire incinerated Sperry Chalet in 2017. A year later, the Howe Ridge Fire burned several historic buildings at Kelly's Camp and Wheeler Cabin. Harker said the agency has not changed in how it protects property in the aftermath of Howe Ridge and Sprig fires. Instead, fire crews rely on an adaptive risk management approach that allows managers to make decisions based on the fire's current behavior and predicted path. If a fire is likely to endanger property, cultural values, or natural resource values, firefighters may move in and stop the blaze, but human life is always the priority. Sometimes that means pulling firefighters off the scene, even if it means a building will burn. The location of the fire can also play into the fire manager's decisions. Harker said officials may be more likely to suppress wildfires east of the Continental Divide because the weather patterns can cause more dangerous conditions, especially for downwind structures. The updated plan acknowledges heightened risk by separating the park into 2 fire management units, with the Continental Divide as the boundary. Previously, the park had 3 fire management units that were largely based on the area's level of development. Once finalized, the new fire management plan could be the law of the park for the next 20 years, but there is still room to adapt for future unknowns, like climate change. The updated plan notes that temperatures in the park are expected to increase 2 to 4 degrees by 2050, and decreasing snowpack will likely cause more frequent and severe summer drought conditions, leading to longer and more severe fire seasons. Harker said climate change continues to be part of intra-agency conversations and will be considered during an annual review of the fire management plan. The National Park Service is accepting public comments on the proposed plan and the environmental assessment through March 12th. The final plan will likely go into effect in early June. Thanks for joining us. News Now is a podcast from the Daily Interlake. We're proud to be the largest independent newsroom in Montana and the longest continuously published newspaper in the region. Today's stories were written by Hungry Horse editor Chris Peterson and Daily Interlake reporter Haley Smalley. And if you haven't already, subscribe to our YouTube channel to never miss an episode of the pod. Everybody stay safe and have a great week. Thanks to our sponsor, Lauren's Auto Repair at 1309 US Highway 2 in Kalispell. Most consistently rated 5-star shop serving the Kalispell area. Visit lawrensauto.com.